Know your place. The Duke of Ashforth set the words down in his library like a verdict, and Eleanor Hartley understood she had been weighed, priced, and dismissed before she had spoken 10 words. He needed her Manchester fortune. He did not want her. A wife to mend his ledgers and carry his name, nothing more. So she rose. She curtsied. Perfect, exact, granting his rank and granting nothing else. And she walked out of his life before he had finished being surprised by her. But Eleanor did not weep. She bought the land bordering his estate and called it business. What she did not yet know, the proud Duke was already half-owned by another man's grudge. That a dead girl's name explained the cruelty in his eyes, and that the insult he flung at her was, in truth, a confession he did not know he had made. Kent in the October of 1814, and the morning light came down clean and cold over the hedgerows, while, the way it does in that county, when autumn has finally made up its mind, a match had been arranged. Not by the two people it would bind. By a woman of 55 who held that sentiment was an indulgence and arrangement a duty, and who had spent 4 decades turning the impossible into the merely tiresome. Lady Castleton had a nephew with a title and a wound in his ledgers. She had located a girl with a fortune and a backbone. The land lay convenient. The season was right. She had not asked either of them how they felt about being right or convenient at all. Have you ever stepped into a room where a man had already decided who you were? Before you spoke, before you sat, before you had handed him one fact to work from, Eleanor Hartley had. More than once. And she had learned to read the verdict in a man's shoulders the way her father read a column of figures. Fast, without sentiment. With an eye for what the numbers were keeping back, she was 27. She wore dark green, well-cut, the kind of dress that announced money, and refused to apologize for where it came from. Manchester, coal and cotton, and the long patient labor of a man who had built something out of nothing and would not be made ashamed of the soot on it. Thomas Hartley sat beside her in the carriage and said little, because he had learned years ago that his daughter did her finest thinking in silence. Ashforth Hall rose from its park, like a thing that had never once doubted itself. The drive raked that morning, the door opening before they had finished the steps. Eleanor took the measure of all of it, not with awe. With arithmetic, the drawing room held a fire and not much warmth. Her father and Lady Castleton arranged themselves in a far corner with the transparent discretion of two people who believed themselves unseen and were nothing of the kind. And then the Duke of Ashforth came in at 11, exactly. Taller than the gossip had promised. And the face was the surprise. Not arrogance, quite. Something colder. The look of a man who had finished thinking before he opened the door and did not expect the room to revise him. He took, in the staged corner, the aunt, the father, the whole theater of a marriage being negotiated by people who would never live inside it. Perhaps we might speak privately, he offered, and it landed less as invitation than as judgment on the company. The library, then. And here was a thing she had not expected to approve of. The books had been read. The spines bore the soft ruin of real use. A man who buys a library to be admired keeps it perfect. This man had wrecked his. One mark in his favor, set against a column that was so far empty. He sat across from her. He studied her the way she had studied his house. I will be direct, please, and she meant it. Because directness was the only coin she had ever trusted. So he set out his terms like a man at market, a wife of sufficient fortune to settle certain matters touching the estate, a wife able to run a household of this size, a wife to carry the Ashforth name through a season without disgracing it. And then the pause, the careful one, the one a man builds a wall in front of. A wife who knows her place in the order of things. Another pause, who will conduct herself accordingly. Eleanor sat very still, because she had heard it, not the words. The wound underneath them, the blank in the sentence had nothing to do with her. It belonged to someone he would not name. And she understood with the precision she brought to every figure that mattered, that she had just been handed an insult that was in truth a confession. and that the man across the table did not know he had made it. "You have been married before," she observed. Something shifted in his face. "Yes," and she did not conduct herself accordingly. The silence this time stretched long enough to mean a great deal. No, she did not. She looked at the fire. She looked at the ruined books. She looked at the man who had walked in carrying a policy stitched out of grief, and had just explained the grief without meaning to. She thought of being weighed for her father's coal and her mother's carriage, of being a remedy, a safer version of some other woman who had failed his unspoken test. She thought of the word place, and what it became when a duke set it down in a library and believed he was being honest. She stood. He looked up, thrown for the first time. He had braced for haggling, for the soft flattery of a fortune hoping to become a title. He had not braced for her rising. "Thank you for your candor, your grace." And then she curtsied. Perfect. The depth exact, the duration measured to the breath. A curtsy that granted his rank and granted nothing else. The kind that said, with no words at all, "I see you clearly, and I am choosing to leave." She held to the curtsy precisely as long as it deserved. Not one instant passed. Then she rose and she walked out of the library, and she gathered her father from the corner with the calm of a woman who had closed her business for the day, and she was the through gate Ashforth before Lady Castleton had wholly grasped what had become of her afternoon. Her father waited until the park was behind them. Then, well, he needs a fortune and a function. She watched Kent slide past in the thin light. He does not need a person. He was quiet a moment. The man has had a hard time of it, Eleanor. Lady Adelaide was. I know what Lady Adelaide was. I also know what I am, and I am not a correction for another man's history. He turned that over. 27 years had taught him when to press his daughter, and when to let the quiet do his arguing. He let the quiet work. What will you do? She looked at the road ahead, and her face wore the particular stillness it took on when she had already decided, and was merely waiting for the world to catch her up. There is a property, Greystone Park. The listing came through last month. Sound land. A fair price. An excellent situation. He did not answer at once, because he knew the county, because he knew the map, because he had looked at that very listing himself and set it aside as too near. It borders Ashforth land. It is excellent property, Eleanor. It is purely a business decision, Father. And he looked at her then, with the expression of a man who had spent her whole life watching her make particular decisions, and knew exactly what they looked like, and what they tended to cost the men who underestimated them. He said no more. He turned to the window, and his daughter watched the road, and very nearly let herself believe that Greystone Park was entirely about the acre reg. It was not. But that part she filed, where she filed everything she was not ready to examine. In the same locked drawer as the ruined spines of his library, and the careful pause before the word place, and the unwelcome fact that he had been a great deal better looking than she had been warned. What no one in that county yet understood, what even she had not let herself say plainly, was a proud man truer, had looked at her and seen a sum to be matched and a problem to be managed, and had dismissed the whole of her before she had spent 10 words. And rather than weep over it or argue it, she had done the one thing such men never plan for. She had bought the ground beneath his certainty. Because a woman who has been told to know her place will sometimes go out and purchase it outright, at market value, with her own money, and let the deed do the talking. They rode the rest of the way in a silence that was not unfriendly. Her father, who distrusted joy and principle and disappointment even more, found he could not be sorry. He had watched her hold a room full of older men since she was a girl. He had watched her be perhaps 3 times in 15 years and right past the point of comfort the rest. If she meant to plant herself on a duke's doorstep and call it commerce, he would not be the man to stand in the furrow. "You will want my solicitors," he said at last, as the lights of the inn, where they would change horses, came up out of the dusk. "I will want them quick." They are nothing if not quick when they are paid to be. Then pay them to be. He almost smiled. He did not. A Hartley did not smile over a thing until the ink was dry on it. But he reached across in the dark of the carriage and put his hand briefly over his daughter's. The nearest he came to a blessing, and she let him, which was the nearest she came to admitting she had wanted one. Greystone changed hands in November, faster than Kent was accustomed to, because Eleanor had her father's solicitors and her father's accounts. And the impatience of a woman who has fixed on a course and has no use for the leisurely crawl of country conveyancing. She wanted the deeds. She wanted the keys. She wanted to stand on the line and know the whole of it was hers. Every waterlogged acre and neglected ditch and ancient oak that had stood there since before either house on either side had a claim worth quarreling over. What she did not know yet, because no one had thought to tell her, was that she had not been the only one who wanted it. Lord Pemberton heard of the sale, at his own table, from his own steward, in the flat voice men use for news they have not yet decided how to hate. He was 53. A baronet, a man who had never once in his been required to revise a position, and had come to mistake that for a virtue rather than a long run of getting his way. He had wanted Greystone. He had wanted the Southfields that ran down to meet his own. He had made what he considered a handsome offer, and had been outbid, quietly and without drama, by a name he did not know. A Hartley, from the north, new money. A woman. He set down his glass, a Miss Hartley. The smile he produced reached nothing behind it. How enterprising, because here is the truth about a proud man who loses. He does not lose to the price. He loses to the person, and he keeps the person in his mouth, like a stone, and he waits. The Duke of Ashforth had the news in the ordinary fashion, from his steward, during the weekly turning over of the estate, mentioned in passing as men mention the things that hold significant while pretending to find them trivial. Miss Hartley, he said, and set down the ledger he had been pretending to study. Thomas Hartley's daughter. Yes, your grace. The conveyance completed on the 14th, he looked at the south window, the one that faced the boundary, the flat, clear run of land to the line where Greystone began and Ashforth ended. He looked at it longer than the matter wanted, the boundary survey. When was it last done? Not since your father's time, your grace. Have it done. Before the month is out. His steward noted it, and asked nothing. Because a good steward learns which questions a duke wishes asked, and which he wishes already answered. But the man watched his master look at that window twice more before the review was finished, and drew his own conclusions, and kept them, as good stewards do, behind his teeth. It would be easy to say, the Duke ordered the survey out of suspicion. It would be nearer the truth to say he could not name why he ordered it at all. He had met the woman once. She had handed him a flawless insult, disguised as a courtesy, and walked out of his life before he had finished being surprised by her. And now she was to live a quarter mile from his door, and he found he could not stop turning the fact over. The way a man worries a loose tooth, telling himself the whole while that it was the property he was thinking of, and not the person. He was a man who kept careful accounts. He would in time be forced to audit that entry and find it would not balance. So 2 surveyors were set in motion that month, from opposite ends of the same disputed ground, each instructed by an owner who had told himself, or herself, that the matter was purely one of lines and deeds. They were both wrong about that. But the lines, at least, were about to become genuinely interesting. She came to Greystone in the first week of December, which scandalized the county on principle. December was for London. For the last of the season's dinners, the rounds of calls, the careful upkeep of a family, standing among families who had been maintaining there since before the colonies had grown rude. December in the country was for people so settled they required no upkeep at all, or for people who did not yet understand the rules. The county had not decided which she was. She arrived on a Monday. 3 carriages of household goods, a housekeeper she had brought down from the north, a flint-eyed Lancashire woman named Mrs. Holt, who had run Hartley houses for 15 years and did not intend to be impressed by a duke she could see from the upstairs windows, and a surveyor engaged in London whose entire trade was the boundaries of property. The county noted that last and discussed it and could not let it alone, because a woman who comes down in December with a boundary man in her train has not come to be charming. She has come to be correct. She spent the first week learning the house the way she learned everything, on foot, every room, every outbuilding. Every acre walked in the cold with the deliberate attention of a woman taking stock of precisely what her money had bought and precisely what it had failed to mend. The estate was sound and badly kept. The drainage had been let go. The south field lay sullen and waterlogged under a crust of frost. 2 of the tenant cottages wanted work that should have been done 2 seasons gone, and the families in them had stopped expecting anyone to do it. She marked all of it. She had a plan drawn by Thursday. She did not hold with waiting for spring to repair what winter had already wrecked. On Friday, she put on her riding habit and rode out to look at the line. The oaks stood along the north edge of Greystone, old, certain, wholly indifferent to deeds. Beyond them lay Ashforth, the same flat winter country, a tenant farm in the middle distance, the great chimneys of the Hall, just showing on the horizon, smoking against a white sky. She stood at the boundary and looked at both sides of it, hers, his. A line, a county with a long memory, would defend them to the last shilling, drawn by men long dead, recorded in hands no living person could read without spectacles and patience. She heard the horse before she saw it. He came from the Ashforth side, on a gray, at a pace that told her he had known where she would be and had ridden out on purpose. He drew up at the line and looked at her across it, with the assessing attention she remembered. The look that arrived before a position already taken. "Miss Hartley, your grace." She did not curtsy. They were standing in a frozen field. The curtsy had been spent in a library, and she did not mean to waste another on a man on horseback. He took in the oaks. He took her in. He came back to her face. "I see you have lost no time. I have lost none." The estate was in want of attention. The boundary survey. Not a question. "My steward tells me you have engaged a man." "I have." "As have I." She looked at him. He looked at her. The wind moved through the bare branches above them, and a long way off a dog barked at nothing, and neither of them gave a foot of ground. "Then we shall have 2 surveys," she said. "They will agree, in which case the matter is dull, or they will not, in which case it is interesting." I find I prefer interesting, and something moved in his face she had not yet catalogued. Not the assessment, something less governed. "You are very direct. You told me you valued directness in the library. I took you at your word. It was the most courteous thing I could find to do with it." The gray shifted. He steadied it with a hand that knew its business and looked at her across the line, and the look had drifted somewhere away from managed and toward something he would have to consider later, alone, where no one could watch him do it. "The south field," he said. "The drainage. The work will want passage across the Ashforth lane. I am aware. I had meant to write to your steward, write to me." She held still. "A small thing, and not a small thing at all. The boundary concerns us both," he went on, as though the correction needed a reason, and he had seized the nearest one. "Write to me, and not the steward." Then he turned the gray. "Good morning, Miss Hartley," and he was gone back toward the hall, and she stood at the line a while, in the cold, thinking about a single word, and the look that had not been the assessing one, before she rode back to Greystone and resolved to think of neither for the rest of the day, with moderate success, which is to say none at all. The surveys came back the week before Christmas, drawn and returned with the precise result she had half hoped for. They did not agree. Under the deed of 1809, by which Greystone had last been sold, the line ran 12 feet north of the oaks. Under the Ashforth estate records, going back to 1743, it ran 12 feet south of them, 24 feet of Kent, claimed by both houses for 70 years, and never once noticed because the men who had held Greystone before her had been mild gentlemen farmers with no taste for a fight, and the men who had held Ashforth had been dukes, and dukes do not generally imagine anyone will contest a thing they have decided is theirs. 24 feet, 2 oak trees, a drainage ditch, and the clean pleasure proper of a problem that was at once legally fascinating and practically real. She read both documents at the writing desk in the Greystone Library on a gray Thursday, and felt a thing she had not felt since she came south, the crisp anticipation of a contest she might actually enjoy. She wrote to him. It took 2 drafts. The first ran too warm, which alarmed her. So she fed it to the grate and watched it curl and told herself it was thrift she was enjoying. The second was correct. It named the discrepancy, named both documents, and proposed a meeting to lay them side by side. She sealed it before she could examine why her hand had shaken over the first and not the second. His reply came the next morning in his own hand, with no padding in it. A day, a time, an instruction to bring the deed of 1809, and a promise to bring the record of 1743, and his name at the foot like a door closing. She read it twice. She noted that he had not employed a secretary. She noted the absence of every soft courtesy a lesser man would have stuffed in to ease the awkwardness, and found, against the better judgment she prided herself on owning, that she preferred it to courtesy, which was inconvenient, which she set aside, a thing she was becoming very practiced at. The meeting came on a morning so cold and clear there was nowhere left to be vague. She reached the line 5 minutes early. He was already there, on foot this time, the older record in his hand, his steward at his shoulder, which told her exactly how he had classed the morning. She had brought her own surveyor, which told him the same in return. They spread the papers on the flat crown of the old boundary wall and read each other's evidence across the stone with the focused attention of 2 people, each entirely right and entirely incompatible. The 1743 record predates your deed by 66 years. The deed is the operative instrument. Precedent is not law. It is only habit wearing a crown. In this county, habit wears it well. In this county, practical weight and legal right are 2 different animals. I find the distinction worth keeping. He proposed a settlement then, in the level voice of a man offering terms. Split the strip, 12 feet each, the ditch maintained jointly. The whole inconvenient business closed, before it could grow a grievance, and she heard the fairness in it, and the intelligence in it, and a man choosing not to win, because he had decided he respected the other party enough to settle. It would have been the easiest thing to say yes. She did not say yes, not because the terms were wrong, because she had spent her life being offered fair settlements by men who expected gratitude for them. And she had learned that the moment to test a man is the moment he is being reasonable. I will consider it. On one condition, which I will name in writing. She watched it land. She watched him understand that she had just declined to be managed, generously, even when agreement cost her nothing. That whatever we record reflects the legal basis of the line, not the historical one. You may keep your 12 feet, your grace. You may not keep the precedent. I will not have it written into the county's memory, that habit. Decided this. You could lose the whole strip by insisting on the principle of it. A court might hand it all to me on the older record. It might. I find I would rather risk the land than concede the point. The land is only land. The point is what they will believe of me in 20 years. And the Duke of Ashforth, who had walked out to that wall to settle a boundary with a fortune he had once described to her Tice as a function to her face, as a function, and not a person, looked at the woman across the stone and understood he had been wrong about something. Not yet about everything, but about something. He did not say so. He inclined his head, which was not a bow and was not nothing, and said he would have it drawn on the legal basis, and turned for the hall with his steward at his heel, and did not look back. And it cost him an effort she could not see to manage it. By then, the county had begun to talk, the way Kent always talked, like a river that runs without effort and without end. A wealthy unwed woman who had bought the land beside a widowed duke and fallen at once into a boundary quarrel with him was the finest thing the season had produced. There was money in it, and land, and a title, and a grievance, and the particular spice of no one yet knowing how it would end. And there was a card. It came to Greystone that same week. Lord Pemberton's compliments, and might he call upon his new neighbor to welcome her properly. She turned it in her fingers. She did not yet know his face. She knew only that the hand was a man's, that the warmth in it ran a shade too eager, and that something in the eagerness made her set it apart from the other cards, the way she set apart any figure in a ledger that did not quite explain itself. What none of them knew, not the talking county, not the smiling baronet, was the thing the Duke had told no living soul since they had put his first wife in the ground. He had not married a stranger and found her wanting. He had built a wall out of his worst year, and carved a single word into the stone of it, and called the wall a principle, so that he would never have to call it the truer, smaller thing it was. And a woman in dark green had curtsied at him like a verdict and walked out, and the wall had cracked, fine as a hair, in a place he could not stop touching. January came in hard and bright, and with it the dinners, because winter in the country is a closed circuit, and the same families rotate through the same rooms with worn ease of people who have been performing for one another since before any of them were born. Eleanor was received carefully, the way a county receives a sum of money it has not yet decided whether to respect or resent. Rich enough to be taken seriously, untitled enough to be discussed, and very good at conversation, which in Kent was either an asset or a nuisance, depending entirely on whose conversation she was good at. She was good at the Aldertons. She was good at the Fenwicks. She was, to her own private irritation, good at Ashforth's table, where she found herself 3 times in a single month, near enough to spar with the Duke and far enough off to pretend she was not enjoying it. Which was the trouble. She was enjoying it. The evenings ran on a rhythm she learned fast. Soup. Then the slow unspooling of grievances dressed up as opinions. Then the men to their port and the women to the drawing-room, where Lady Castleton presided over the tea, things like a general tidying a field she has already won. And in between, the things she had not planned for. The Duke, finding his way to whatever stretch of the table she occupied, never openly. A man who had hosted since he was 20 did not lunge. He drifted, like weather coming on. "You are arguing turnpikes with Sir Hugh again," he observed one evening at her shoulder. "Sir Hugh has views on the road bill. Sir Hugh has views on water. Roads are where he keeps them. When no ditch is to hand, she declined to smile on principle. He is the only man at this table who knows what a culvert is. That is regrettably true. The rest of us inherited our acres. He understands his, and there it was again. A flicker of the thing under the dry exchange. A man who knew the difference between owning a thing and earning it. She filed it where she filed all of him. In the long, careful reckoning she pretended was idle and was not. Sir Hugh Brandon was 60 if he was a day. Kind in the way of men, too plain to be cruel, and entirely deaf to the social weather. He talked of water, only of water, where it pooled and why, what fall a channel wanted, how a wet field robbed, demand before ever he reached market. She liked him better than anyone in the room and made no secret of it, because Sir Hugh wanted nothing from her, which in that county made him very nearly unique. It was Sir Hugh, in fact, who said the first thing that did not fit. They were on her south field, late in the month, the frost gone soft and treacherous, and she had asked him to walk the failing ditch because he was the only authority. Within 20 miles she trusted. He talked fall and inlet, and then, gazing across the line to where the Ashforth chimneys smoked, he dropped it, idle, the way a man drops a fact he does not know is heavy, pity about the hall. Fine land going under. He shook his head. Old Duke ran it into the ground before he died, borrowed against half of it. They say young Ashforth's been 10 years climbing out of his father's hole. She kept walking. She did not break stride. Because a woman raised in trade does not flinch at the word borrowed. She leans toward it, borrowed against it. From whom? He shrugged, already losing interest, already back on the subject of fall. Couldn't say. A baronet, I think. One of those private arrangements. You know how it goes. Land's worth nothing if the paper on it belongs to another man, and there. That was the entry in the ledger that would not explain itself, because she had wondered, hadn't she, from the first morning in that library. A duke does not interview a Manchester fortune for sport. He interviews it because he needs it, and a duke with 2 centuries of stone behind him need a fortune for amusement. He needs it to survive. She had assumed pride. She had assumed a man too vain to say the words "I am in difficulty," who had dressed the difficulty in a requirement and called it a wife who knew her place. But pride did not explain the haste. Pride did not explain a man riding out to a frozen field to pin down a strip of dirt before it could grow teeth. Want explained it. Real. Cornered Want. She said nothing to Sir Hugh. She thanked him for the inlet, and walked him back to his horse and watched him ride off toward whatever ditch was next, claiming his attention, and stood a while in the cold with a new figure added to the column, a baronet. Private paper. The Ashforth land mortgaged to a man. No one would name it a dinner. She thought of a card set apart from the others, because the warmth in it had read false. And she went indoors and wrote to her father's solicitor that night 2 plain questions, and sealed them, and told the candle it was prudence, and the candle did not believe her any more than she did. The answer took 11 days to come up from London, because lawyers are paid by the hour and travel at the speed of their fees. It reached her in the first week of February. She read it once at the writing desk, and then again, and then a third time, and then she set it down with the particular care you give. A thing you have just discovered is loaded. A mortgage. Secured against the southern third of the Ashforth estate, the very acres that ran down to her own oaks. Drawn up in the last reckless years of the old Duke's life and held, the solicitor wrote, by a single private party, Sir Reginald, Lord Pemberton. She sat with it a long moment in the grey February light. Pemberton. The man who had wanted Greystone. The man whose card she had set apart because the warmth had run false. The man she had outbid without ever once seeing his face. He held the paper on the Duke of Ashforth's land, which meant that the man who had insulted her across a library table was, in some quiet legal sense she was only now assembling, already half owned by the man, with every reason on earth to despise her for buying the field he had coveted. A man may inherit a title and a debt in the same breath, she thought, and spend the rest of his life pretending only one of them is his. She told no one, not her father, who would have wanted to act, not Lady Castleton, who would have known what to do with it. She folded the solicitor's letter and laid it in the locked drawer of the desk. Apart from her other correspondence, the way she had once set the card apart from the other cards. She held the knowledge the way she held a sum she had not yet decided how to spend, and she watched after that with a different pair of eyes. Because the boundary quarrel, which had felt like a contest between her and the Duke, looked suddenly small. There was a larger board and a third player on it. And he had been at the edge of the county the whole time, smiling, holding paper, calling it neighborliness. She understood, too, the full weight of the sentence she had heard in October, and it changed the color of it. A wife who knows her place. It had not been only arrogance. It had been a man trying, with the one tool his pride would let him hold, to keep his house above water. He had needed the fortune badly. He had asked for it badly. And then he had let her walk out of his library, inside 10 minutes rather than soften a single condition of the asking, which told her something about how deep the pride ran, and how much it had cost him, and how little he understood about what he had actually been doing. The formal record of the boundary arrived that same week, drawn on the legal basis as she had demanded. The line set 12 feet each side of the ooks entered into the county's memory not as habit but as right. He had conceded the point. The land had split as he offered. But the principal stood recorded as she had insisted, and she sat with the document and understood what it had cost a duke to let managed 2 centuries of Paul's centuries of his family's assumption into the permanent record. She wrote him a single line of acknowledgement. He sent a single line back. "You may keep the land, your grace. I find I am content with the more permanent half of it." She had not intended to send it. She sent it, and she imagined, with an accuracy she would later learn was exact, the corner of his mouth doing the thing it did when he was holding off a smile. But the debt sat under everything now, the way the water sat under the south field, out of sight, pushing up, rotting the ground from beneath what though the surface looked sound. And she found she could no longer think of the man as merely proud, or merely difficult, or merely the author of an insult. She had answered with a curtsy. She thought of him now as a man standing on land that was not entirely his to stand on, in a house mortgaged to a stranger's grudge, asking a fortune to marry him, and unable even then to ask it kindly. It was not a flattering portrait. It was, she suspected, a true one, and the truer it grew, the harder she found it to keep him at the cold distance she had filed him under in October. She went to Lady Castleton for the rest of it. Not directly. Eleanor did nothing directly, when the indirect road would tell her more. She called on a Tuesday on the pretext of returning a book, and let the conversation drift the way she had learned. Conversations could be made to drift, toward the family, toward the hall, toward the first wife the county spoke of in the lowered voices, kept for the dead and the disgraced. "You wish to ask about Adelaide," Lady Castleton said, before the book had left her hands. "Because the aunt missed nothing, and respected only people who also missed nothing. Everyone wishes to ask. Most lack the spine to do it to my face. I find I prefer your way. Ask. I would not pry into grief. It is not grief you would be prying into. It is a story the county has told itself wrong, and I am too old to keep being patient with the wrong version. Sit. You may as well have it from someone who was there, and she had it. Adelaide had been 19. A cousin of the Pembertons married up into the Ashforth. Name the way pretty portionless girls were married up, because her people had blood, and no money, and the old Duke had wanted the blood. She had been bright and frightened and wholly unready. She had laughed too loud at the wrong dinners and gone silent at the right ones. And the great rooms of the hall had closed over her, the way cold water closes over a child who cannot swim. And Edmund, young then, certain then, as only a man can be, who has never yet been wrong in any way that signified. He had not been cruel. That was the thing Eleanor would carry away and could not put down. He had been worse than cruel. He had been correct. He had told his bride again and again, in the patient, reasonable voice of a man instructing, that she must learn the place she had married into, that she must steady, and she could not. And he had made her failing a flaw of her character, instead of a cost of his coldness. She had grown quiet, and then silent, and then ill in the vague, wasting way the doctors of the age could neither name nor mend. And one spring she had simply not risen, and the county had murmured, "Poor delicate creature," and Edmund had said nothing at all. He did not lose a wife, Lady Castleton said, and for the first time the dryness was gone from her. He misplaced a girl in rooms too large for her, and called the losing fate. And he has spent 3 years building a doctrine out of it so that he need never look at the smaller, truer word for what it was, which is negligence. The slow, well-mannered kind. The kind that wears good clothes and means no harm, and kills just the same. Eleanor sat with the cooling tea between her hands, and understood the whole shape of the October sentence at last. He had not been describing the wife he wanted. He had been describing the disaster he could not survive a second time, and he had handed it to her across a library table, and called it a list of conditions, and she had curtsied and gone, and she had been right to. She was still right to. Knowing why a wound bleeds does not oblige a woman to be bandaged to it. And Pemberton, she said, because she was, before everything else, a woman who followed the money. He is her cousin, and he holds the mortgage. The aunt's eyes sharpened to points. You have been busy. I have been thorough. There is a difference. What does he want? What does a proud man ever want? He wants it both ways. Lady Castleton set down her cup. He believes the Ashforths killed his cousin. He is not wholly wrong, which is what makes him dangerous. Because a man who is partly right will burn the world to avoid noticing the part where he is wrong. He has held the paper trees and done nothing with it but let it ripen. He likes Edmund knowing he holds it. He has liked the leash until now better than he would like the kill. She looked at Eleanor very steadily. And now there is you, buying the land he wanted, quarreling with the Duke and setting the whole county laughing about it. Planting yourself, however you choose to dress your reasons, square in the middle of a board he had thought belonged to him alone. I bought Greystone as an investment. Of course you did, said Lady Castleton, in the serene tone of a woman who had been handed the same falsehood in 3 different shapes and had formed her own opinion of all of them. Drink your tea, child. It is going cold on an untruth. Eleanor did not drink the tea. She went home, and she sat a long time, failing light, with the solicitor's letter locked in its drawer and the shape of a dead girl's story sitting in her chest. And she did the most dangerous thing a woman who has resolved to feel nothing can do. She began to feel something for the man, not in spite of the wound, because she finally understood the exact wrong shape it had healed in. And because once a woman like Eleanor decides a man is a problem she might solve, she is already lost and knows it, and keeps walking toward him regardless. February brought. The cold Kent had been saving all winter and spent it all at once, and the cold turned the failing ditch from a nuisance into a crisis. Ice in the channel, water backing up where it had nowhere to go. The south field, which she had very nearly mastered, drowning sullen and gray under a fresh skin of frost, 2 seasons of careful planning going under in a week. She did the practical thing. She wrote to him about the inlet, the fall, the passage across the Ashforth lane the redesign would require. She wrote it plain and signed it, and told herself it was the ditch. He did not send a letter back. He did not send the steward. He came himself the following afternoon on foot, which was not at all what she had braced for, and which undid her composure in a manner no letter could have. She was in the field when he arrived, boots ruined, hem black to the knee. A woman in the middle of actual labor, which was not the condition in which one received a duke, except that she had stopped arranging herself for his benefit sometime in January, and did not intend to resume the practice now. She saw him at the gate. He waited there. He did not call out or hurry her. He simply stood, in a coat made for use rather than show, and let her finish with her estate manager and cross the soft ground at whatever pace she chose. She chose her own. He did not appear to expect another. I thought a look at the ditch would tell me more than a letter. He offered by way of having no excuse at all. It will. She did not pretend otherwise. They walked the length of it in the frost, and she showed him where the ice had backed the water, and where the old design had failed and what she meant to do about it. And he listened the way he did everything, completely, without performance. He asked 2 questions that proved he had understood the problem, and then one that proved he had already seen the answer. If you moved the inlet here, he said, his gloved finger landing on the survey map at the exact point her own surveyor had landed on, the fall would carry the ice clear before it could gather. That was my man's conclusion. It is the obvious one. A pause. The work wants the lane. You have it flat. Final. No condition behind it. I will tell my steward today. She looked at him. The mud, the plain coat, the breath fogging between them in the cold. A duke who held a strip of land she had fought him for, about to hand her free passage across his own ground, without making her ask a second time, and who did not seem to grasp that this was, to a woman who had spent her life having access ground out of her shilling by shilling, a remarkable thing. You came yourself. He glanced up from the map. You could have sent the steward. Or written. He held her eyes a beat too long. I told you in December to write to me. It seemed only fair to answer in the same coin, so she offered tea. Because it was bitter and he had walked, and because some part of her she was not consulting had been waiting for the chance, he accepted. Which was the first thing he had ever accepted under her roof. They sat in the Greystone Library, where she worked and which she did not apologize for, the desk buried in estate papers and survey maps. He looked at all of it the way he looked at everything, reading the room, reading her. You work here every morning. Not the drawing room. The drawing room is for visitors. The library is for work. You are not a visitor. What am I then, my neighbor, with whom I share a boundary, a ditch, and now a lane? The drawing room would be an overstatement. He drank his tea. His eye found the shelf, the books she had carried down from the north, the soft broken backs of them, so like his own. He stopped on one. You have the Coke. On husbandry. I have read the Coke. Twice. I disagree with him about clover. Everyone disagrees with him about clover. He is wrong about clover, which makes him insufferable, because he is right about nearly everything else. And then the thing happened that neither of them had arranged. They talked. Not roads, not boundaries. The fence topics of a dinner fell away. And they talked of land the way two people talk who both love a thing and have both bled for it, finishing each other's complaints about seed and tenancy and price, until 40 minutes had gone, and the tea was cold, and the light was failing in the tall windows, and neither had thought to manage a single second of it, and then it shifted. The way these things shift. He set down his cup and looked at the fire, not at her, and said in a lower voice, the one with a wall behind it, you asked me, in October, whether my first wife had failed to conduct herself accordingly. She went still. I said she had. I have thought about that answer for 4 months. It was not true. It was not her failure. It was. He stopped. The wall, 3 years built, leaned. His jaw worked. It was. And then he caught himself, the way a man catches himself at the lip of a drop too deep to climb back out of. He stood. Abruptly. Forgive me. It grows late, and I have kept you from your work, and the ditch wants doing before the next frost. He was at the door before she had risen. Thank you for the tea, Miss Hartley. The access begins tomorrow, and he was gone into the dark, the wall hastily restacked, the confession swallowed half-spoken, and Eleanor stood alone in her own library with the unfinished sentence hanging in the cold air where he had left it. She sat back down at the desk. She did not work. She thought instead of a man who had walked 4 months to the edge of one true sentence, and could not even now make himself jump. March came, and with it the first real gathering of the spring. The county assembly at the Aldertons. 40 people, the whole of Kent that mattered, emerging blinking from 3 months of shuttered houses, with 3 months of stored opinion to spend. Eleanor had been received, across the winter, with a warmth that had thawed in step with the weather, because the county had decided she was serious about Greystone and meant to stay. Most of the county. Not all of it. She knew the names of the unconvinced the way she knew the doubtful figures in a column, and chief among them now, she understood, was a baronet who held paper on a duke and a grudge against the dead. He was there. She felt him before she found him, the particular chill of a man arranging himself for an effect. He had been circling her a quarter of an hour. She had marked it and judged it within the ordinary range of a social evening. She was wrong about the range. She was talking with the Duke, in fact, when it came. Easily, by then. About the south field, which the new inlet had finally dried. About the spring planting. And he had asked her a question, the first he had ever asked, that was not about land but about the north. About Manchester. About the world she had come up in. And she had answered. And he had listened, and asked something, and she had thought, with a flicker she refused to name. This is what he looks like, when he is wholly present. And she had thought, hard upon it, I must stop keeping a record of what he looks like, when he is wholly present. And that was the moment Pemberton chose. Because a man like Pemberton always chooses the moment with the largest audience, and the most to lose. Miss Hartley, smooth. Pitch to carry. 4 people within easy earshot, which was no accident. Greystone is looking very well, I hear. Such extensive improvements. Thank you. The drainage wanted attention. Drainage, smiled at the listeners, not at her. Quite. One does wonder, though, whether the investment is altogether proportionate. To the likely tenure, she held his eyes. She had heard this song in a dozen rooms, the new money song, and had a complete answer ready, and was choosing which verse to open with. He did not let her open. He had not come to win an argument. He had come to drop a stone in a well and watch the rings spread. Kent has a certain character, an established order. One hopes a newcomer measures the depth of the water before she dives so confidently into it, particularly when the ground she has chosen to build upon. And here he turned, slow, deliberate, toward the Duke and let the silence do the cruel work. May not be hers to build upon it all. Some estates in this county are more encumbered than they appear. A prudent investor inquires after the paper before she admires the house, and the room understood of it. Enough. Enough heads turned. Enough breath caught, because he had done 2 murders with 1 sentence. He had named Eleanor a climbing fortune, diving into water she could not sound. And he had announced to the assembled county that the Duke of Ashforth's land was mortgaged, that someone held the paper on the great hall, that the proudest man in Kent was a debtor, and he had done it standing 6 feet from the man. Smiling, displaying the leash where everyone could see it. She felt the floor of the evening drop, not for herself. She had survived worse with a straighter spine. For Edmund, she turned and saw on his face a thing she had never seen there. Not in the library, not in the field, not anger, not yet. The white frozen stillness of a man whose oldest shame has just been dragged into the candlelight by the one person living, who knew exactly where it lay buried. She opened her mouth to take the blow onto herself, to haul the room's attention back where she could handle it. She did not get the chance. The improvements at Greystone, the Duke said, and his voice came from somewhere beneath all the voices she knew of his. The library voice and the field voice, stripped away to the one underneath. The one with whose in it, and the whole weight of a name that had never once needed to raise itself. Have drained a field that beat my father, and beat his father before him, the better part of a century. The work is sound. The investment is exact. Anyone with the smallest knowledge of that land would know it. He turned, unhurried, and looked at Pemberton with the assessing attention she remembered. And it was a terrible thing to watch, aimed at someone else. As for paper, every great estate in this county carries history, its owner. Would mine know more and no less than yours, Pemberton. A gentleman does not inquire after another man's history in a crowded room. He waits to be told it. Or he does without a breath. The county benefits from landowners who take their ground seriously. I had thought we were all agreed, were we not? It was not loud. He had no need of volume. He held Pemberton's eyes one moment past comfort, the ducal equivalent of a slap, and turned back to the conversation as though nothing whatever had occurred. And Pemberton's smile underwent a swift, sweating recalibration, and he found someone else entirely to speak to, with the haste of a man corrected in public, who needs ground to recover on. But the debt was a public fact now. The leash was visible, and later, at the edge of the room, Lady Castleton said the thing plainly, all the dryness gone from her. He will move on the mortgage, Eleanor. Soon. He has shown his hand because he has finished waiting, and when he calls it, Edmund will lose the southern third of Ashforth, the very land that runs to your line, unless he can find money he does not have, which is why he went hunting a fortune last October, and made such a ruin of the asking that he drove it out of his own library inside 10 minutes. Eleanor stood holding a glass she had not drunk from, looking across the crowded room at the man who had spent a portion of his pride to keep her dry, and who was about to lose a third of his world to a baronet who would call it justice. And something moved in her, quiet and total, the way the water had moved all winter under the south field, out of sight, gathering certain to surface. She set the glass down untouched. She did not yet know how. She knew only that night, she had decided. Whatever it took, she would not stand by and watch him taken. 3 days after the assembly, the apology came to the gate, not by letter, not through the steward, by the man himself, on foot, in the gray early light of a morning that had not decided whether to rain, and he did not ride up the drive like a duke calling. He stopped at the plain wooden gate, at the edge of the south field, and he waited there, his hand on the top rail, like a man who had concluded he had not earned the right to come any farther in. She saw him from the field, where she was checking the new inlet, which had held. She did not hurry. She had stopped hurrying for him in January, and would not resume it, now with the whole county still, humming over what Pemberton had said and what Edmund had answered. She crossed the soft ground at her own pace. He did not appear to expect another. He was learning that too, Your Grace, Miss Hartley. He looked at the field running clean, where it had drowned a fortnight since. It works. It works. The back acres at Ashforth came up dry this week. First time in 3 winters, his hand tightened on the rail. Your design fixed both sides of the line. I came to say so, and to say, he stopped. The wall leaned. She watched it lean. I owe you an apology. She waited. She had learned the worth of waiting from him, and she let the silence do her work. In the library. In October. What I said, and the manner of it. It was not how a man speaks to anyone he respects. I came to that room with a verdict already written. It had nothing to do with you and everything, to do with a thing I have never said aloud to a living soul. Adelaide, she said. Gently, because she already knew, and it cost him less to be met than to confess to air. He flinched at the name in her mouth. Then he steadied, and then he said it. The whole of it, the word he had not reached in February, the one he had swallowed half-spoken in her own library and carried back into the dark. I did not lose her. His voice had gone very flat. The flatness of a man holding himself together by refusing every inch of feeling. That is the lie I have told 3 years. That she sickened. That she faded. That fate took her and left me a widower the county could pity. The truth is smaller and worse. I corrected her. I corrected her until there was nothing left to correct. She came to me bright and frightened and 19, and instead of teaching her to stand in those rooms, I told her, over and over in the kindest reasonable voice, that she ought already to know how, and she could not, and I made her shame the fault of her character instead of the cost of my coldness. She did not break against me, Miss Hartley. I wore her away. There is a difference, and I have spent 3 years pretending there is not. Eleanor stood with the gate between them and felt the morning go very quiet. So when my aunt brought you to my library, I had built a fortress out of that. I decided the safest thing a man in my position could do was require a wife strong enough that I could never wear her thin, and I dressed the requirement in the ugliest word I own. I told you to know your place. I handed you my worst fear and called it a list of conditions. And you, the corner of his mouth moved, grief-shaped, not a smile. You curtsied and you left. And it was the most accurate thing anyone has done in my presence in a decade. You read the whole sentence I would not finish, and answered it without a word, and you were entirely right to go. I was, she agreed. No softening. He had not come for softening, I know. Then hear the part you have not said. She did not wait now, because some things fester if they are not put plainly. I understood it in the library before you finished. That is why I left, and not because you wounded me, though you did. I left because I saw you were not looking at me at all. You were managing a ghost, and I will tell you what I told my father in the carriage. I am not a correction for Adelaide. I am not a safer version of her. I am not the solution to anything you broke. If you cannot see me without seeing her standing behind me, then we have nothing further to discuss, and you may keep your apology, because it would be only one more thing you were doing to feel better about her. He took the whole blow. He did not defend himself. And that, more than anything he had said, told her how far he had come from the man in the October library. I do not see her behind you, he said quietly. I have not since December. You are not a safer version of anyone. You are the least manageable person I have met in 10 years of managing a very large estate. And I have come to consider that a complete and accurate accounting of my situation, and against every intention she had carried to the gate, the hard thing in her chest gave way a fraction. She reached out. She lifted the latch. She opened the gate. Come in. The field is worth seeing properly, and I find I owe you a great deal of tea. He came through. He fell into the step beside her, and neither of them said anything that resolved anything, and everything that needed saying first had been said, and the gray morning held its reign a little longer to let them walk. The reprieve lasted 9 days, because a man who has shown his hand has stopped waiting, and Pemberton had shown his at the assembly before the whole county. The letter reached Ashforth Hall on a Wednesday, on heavy paper, in a solicitor's careful hand, formal as a coffin. It called the mortgage, the full sum due within the month, secured against the southern third of the estate, with a clause granting the holder the right of purchase at value should the debtor default. The southern third, the acres that ran to the oaks, the land Edmund had bled to keep dry, and everyone who could read a deed understood that the worth of all the rest, the hall and the home farm and 2 centuries of name, would crack like river ice under a wagon the moment. A third of it belonged to a hostile neighbor with a grudge and a smile. He rode to Greystone the same afternoon, not slowly this time. She met him in the library, where the maps and the half-answered letters had multiplied since the planting began. And she saw his face, and did not need telling. He has called it this morning. The month, and then he takes the Southland at value, which means he takes the line, which means he takes you for a neighbor on 3 sides instead of 1, and makes your life a long series of small cruelties dressed as boundary law, because he cannot reach me through you any other way. A bitter sound. I have carried my own ruin to your door, Miss Hartley. I came to warn you. Since you bought into this county beside a man about to lose a third of himself in it. There is a way out, she said. You marry money, quickly. Enough to clear the paper before the month is up. She watched him as she said it. She watched the precise thing move across his face. There is an offer on the table to do exactly that. The words came out like stones. It arrived in the same post. Pemberton's. He has a niece, unwed. He proposes. He is good enough to call it a proposal. That if I attach myself to his family, the paper will find itself forgiven. The debt dissolves into a marriage settlement. Ashforth is saved, and it belongs, in every way that matters, to him. His hand closed on the back of a chair. He would have his cousin's death paid back in full. An Ashforth bent to a Pemberton's will. The great proud hall run by his blood. And the man he believes killed Adelaide, spending the rest of his life, knowing exactly who holds the leash, married to the proof of it. And I have refused him. He said it simply. And the simplicity was the most expensive thing she had ever heard a man spend. I will lose the land before I will buy it back with that. I made my pride a principle once, and a girl died of it. I will not save my house by handing my whole self to the man who hates me and calling it a settlement. I would rather lose the South Third standing than keep it on my knees. So, he looked at her, and there was no calculation left in him. Nothing managed, only a man who had chosen to drown sooner than be saved on those terms. I came to tell you the worst of it, not to ask you for anything. I have asked enough of you already, simply by living next door, and Eleanor, who had spent her whole life learning to tell a man performing his nobility from a man who meant it, knew that he meant it, and it undid something in her no kindness ever could have, because a kind man is common. A man who will lose everything before he will buy it with another person's dignity is not. She did not tell him yet what she had done. She had only just begun to do it, in the days since the assembly, working through Pemberton's own lesser creditors. And it was not finished, and a thing not finished is a thing that can still fail. So she held it, the way she held every card she had not yet decided to play. She said only, "Then we will think of something else. You will not marry that girl." And you will not lose your land. I do not yet know the shape of it, but I have rarely failed to find a shape when I have decided one exists." He looked at her for a long moment, the maps between them, the gray light going. "You speak as though it were arithmetic. Most things are. The trick is finding which figure the others are hiding behind." She held his gaze. "Go home, Edmund. Do not answer Pemberton. Not yet. Give me a fortnight. A fortnight changes nothing. It may change everything," she said. "Give it to me anyway." She gave it 12 days, not 14, because she hid her father's solicitors and her father's accounts, and a thing her father had taught her before she could properly read a balance sheet, that the man who holds another man's debt holds the man, and that there is exactly one way to free a man held by his debt. It is not pity, and it is not love, and it is not a duke's cold defense across a crowded room. It is to buy the paper. She had begun the morning after she decided, which was the morning after the assembly. She had not gone at the great note first. She had gone at the small ones, because she had learned, in the years of sitting at her father's elbow, that a proud man's strength is nearly always built on borrowed sand, and Pemberton was no exception. He had leaned on 3 lesser creditors of his own to keep up his house and his standing, and a man who holds another's leash while standing on borrowed ground is far easier to unbalance than he believes. She bought the small papers first, quietly, through agents who did not carry the Hartley name. Then she let the men who held them understand that she would relieve them of the larger one as well. The Ashforth mortgage Pemberton had pledged among his securities, and that they might be free of the baronet entirely, if they chose. They chose. Money does that. It loosens loyalties that sentiment has glued together for years. Twice she thought it would fail. Twice she thought Pemberton would catch the scent and pull his creditors back before the ink was dry. He did not. He was watching the Duke, waiting for the answer to his ultimatum, sure of his ground, never once imagining that the ground had been sold from under him by the Manchester woman he had spent the winter despising. On the 11th day, the assignment was executed, witnessed, complete. The whole of the Ashforth mortgage transferred out of Lord Pemberton's hands and into a single new holder she sent for Edmund. She did not write the reason. He came at once, because a fortnight had nearly run, and he believed he was about to hear that there was, after all, no shape to be found. She had 2 papers on the desk when he arrived. The old one, the solicitor's letter from February, soft now at the folds from being read and refolded, the letter that had first told her, in a clerk's neat hand, who held the paper on his land, and beside it, the new one. The ink barely a week and a half dry, the assignment of the debt entire. "Read the second," she said. He read it. She watched it go through him in stages. The lawyer's hand, the figures, the names, and at the foot the transfer, complete, witnessed, not yet a fortnight old. The mortgage on the southern third of the Ashforth estate, every shilling of it passed out of Pemberton's grip and into one new owner, E. Hartley. "You," he stopped. He read it again, as though the second reading might change the name at the bottom. He looked up at her with an expression she had not catalogued in 5 months of cataloguing him, and it was something near to fear. "You hold my debt, as of 9 days ago. I bought the small papers Pemberton stood upon, and then his creditors sold me the great one to be quit of him. He called your mortgage the week before last, not knowing it had already ceased to be his to call. He stood holding it, the color gone out of his face. The great room, very still around them. "So now you hold the leash," he said. "Lo, Pemberton would have made me a Pemberton. You could make me a Hartley. You could clear the paper and own the South Third, and the line and the man on the end of it, exactly as he meant to. And I would have no ground to refuse you, none at all, because I have just told you, to my own ruin, that I would sooner lose the land than kneel for it." Something cracked in his voice. "Is that what this is?" And here was the moment. She saw it as clearly as she's ever seen the one figure in a column that decided the whole account. She could let him believe it. She could keep the power she had bought and watch him bend to her, instead of to Pemberton, and call it love, and he would never know the difference, and it would poison every year that came after. She came round the desk. She took the assignment out of his hands, and then she held it back out to him, not to keep for her, to take into his own grip. "I do not hold your debt to own you, Edmund," she said, and the name came out steady. "I hold it so that no one else can. There is the paper, it is yours. Burn it, frame it, pay me a peppercorn a year. For the next century, I do not care which. I will not be Pemberton with better manners. I bought the leash to cut it, not to take up the other end. You are free of him, and you are free of me. What you do now, you do as a man with nothing whatever held over him." He looked at the paper in his hands. The thing that had owned him since his father died, lying free on her desk among the survey maps of a field she had drained on both their behalves. "Why?" he said. "Barely a word, that," she said, "is a longer conversation, and we will have it. But not while you are holding your whole life in your two hands, and cannot think straight for the relief of it. Go home, burn that or do not, and come back when you have slept, and ask me the question you have been not asking since December, and ask it as a free man, or do not ask it at all." Pemberton learned the truth 2 days later, and Eleanor was there to see it, because she had asked for the meeting, and a thing like this she would not hand to anyone else. He came to Greystone believing he still held the cards, believing the Duke had crawled at last, ready to dictate his terms. She let him talk, the way she let men talk, until he had spent the whole of his prepared cruelty into the air of her library. He spoke of tenure and proportion, of newcomers and established order, of how a wise woman inquires after the paper before she admires the house. And when he had finished, she set the assignment of debt on the table between them and turned it to face him. She watched 53 years of a man who had never once been required to revise a position discover before her eyes that his last lever had been sold out from under him by the very woman he had spent the season despising. He went white, then red, then strangely still. "You bought it." His voice had thinned. "Through my own creditors. While he stopped. He looked at the paper, and for one moment the cruelty fell entirely off his face, and what lay under it was not strategy at all. It was grief. Old, badly kept grief, the kind a man turns into a campaign because the alternative is to sit alone with it. "He killed her," Pemberton said, and the word "her" cracked in a way that was suddenly terribly human. "She was 19. She wrote to me. Did you know that? She wrote to me from that house that she was so cold in it she had forgotten the sound of her own laugh. And I did nothing because what does a poor relation do against a duke? And then she was dead. And I have spent 3 years making certain he would pay for it. And you have just taken that from me as well." And Eleanor, who had come prepared to be merciless, found that she could not be. Because the man was a villain, yes. And he was also, beneath it, a cousin who had failed to save a girl and had never once forgiven himself. In the loud and expensive way men forgive themselves by punishing somebody else. "He knows what he did," she said quietly, "better than you do. He has stopped lying to himself about it, which is more than most men ever manage. And it is the only punishment that was ever going to mean a thing, because the one you wanted would have let him go on calling it fate. You wanted him to suffer. He does. You merely wished to watch." Pemberton said nothing. His hand had closed on the edge of the table. "Adelaide is not served by your taking his land," she went on, gentler than she had planned. "She is not served by anything you have done these 3 years. If you wish to honor your cousin, my lord, go home and grieve her properly, which I do not think you have ever once allowed yourself to do, and stop dressing your sorrow up as justice. It becomes neither of you." He stood a long moment, and then he did the thing she had not expected, the thing that told her she had been right not to grind him into the floor when she could have. He inclined his head, stiffly, the smallest concession a proud man can make and still call himself a man. "You are," he said, "a great deal more formidable than I gave you credit for. I gave you very little. I see my error." And he left, not crushed, not crowing but smaller. The way a man is smaller, when a weight he has carried too long is finally lifted out of his arms, whether he wished it or no. He did not trouble her again. He withdrew to his own house, and, she heard much later, to his own long-deferred grief at last, and the county, which had braced itself for a war between the two estates, was almost disappointed to be denied one. There was no duel of solicitors, no ruined duke, no scandal to feed the spring. Only a baronet who came less often to dinner and spoke more softly when he came, and once, at the church between the two estates, was seen standing a long while at a grave that bore his cousin's name, with his hat in his hands, and no audience to perform for at all. Eleanor, who heard of it, said nothing. She had no wish to crow either. She had wanted the man stopped, not destroyed. There is a difference, and she had spent her life learning to keep it. Edmund came back the next day, as instructed, and he made a complete ruin of it. He came into the library where she was working, and he stood very straight, and he delivered, in the careful constructed voice of a man who has rehearsed, an offer. He spoke of the suitability of the match, the convenience of the adjoining estates, the sense it made. Now the debt was cleared and the boundaries settled, and the practical matters in such good order that they should formalize an arrangement which served them both so sensibly. He used the word arrangement. He used the word sensible. He was halfway through the word advantageous when she set down her pen. "No," she said. He stopped. "No, no, sit down. You ridiculous man. You are doing it again." She nearly laughed and did not let herself. "You walked into a library in October and offered me a position. You have walked into another in March and offered me a transaction. You are the most intelligent person I know, and you cannot, it seems, ask for the one thing you actually want without first wrapping it in a ledger, so that, if I refuse it, your pride survives. I will not be the solution to your arithmetic. I have been someone's sensible estrangement my whole life, my father's heir because there were no sons. A fortune to be matched against a title. I did not buy your freedom so that you could turn round and offer me a merger," she rose. "Marry me as a man who wants me, Edmund, or do not marry me at all. But I will not be advantageous. I would sooner be alone than advantageous." He looked at her, and then he did the bravest thing she had seen him do. Braver than refusing Pemberton, because that had cost him only land. He took off the armor, all of it. Right there among the maps, he stopped managing. "I have loved you since the boundary wall," he said. "Since you told me you would rather lose the land than lose the point. I had no word for it then. I have one now. I have been afraid of it for 4 months. Because the last time I loved a woman I wore her away to nothing, and I did not trust myself to stand near anything bright again." His voice was unsteady, and he let it be. "I do not want a sensible arrangement. I do not want an advantageous match. I want you. The unmanageable, exact, infuriating whole of you. I want to argue clover with you until one of us is dead. I am asking, and there is no ledger beneath it, and if you refuse me I have nothing to hide behind, and I am asking anyway. Will you marry me?" And there it was, the thing she had bought a mortgage to make possible, without once admitting that was why she did it. A free man, asking with nothing held over either of them. "Yes," she said. "Of course I will, you difficult creature." And then, because she had carried it alone too long, "I have a confession of my own, and you will not admire what it says of my judgment. I told my father I bought Greystone as an investment. I told the county it was the acreage. I told myself it was the soundness of the property." She met his eyes. "It was you? I was so angry, after the library, that you had looked at my father's coal and my mother's posture and dismissed me before I had spent 10 words, that I bought the field beside yours, because I wanted to be a fact you could not write past. I wanted you to wake each morning and see Greystone on your horizon and know I was there and have to reckon with me. I wanted you to see me, not the fortune. Me." She shook her head at her own folly. It was not a mature strategy, it was an effective one. The corner of his mouth finally won. It produced a boundary dispute, a drainage crisis, a public scandal, and the redemption of my entire estate. It produced you standing in my library with nothing to hide behind. I consider the investment sound. He crossed the room. She stood, because this was not a moment for sitting. And they were very close, among the maps and the spring light, 5 months of frozen fields and contested oaks behind them. He looked at her with the full, undefended attention that had been building since December and was now, at last, entirely permitted, and she did not curtsy. She set her hand flat against his chest, deliberate, delivered, and looked up at him, and there was nothing in her face managing anything at all. And he kissed her, and it was not tentative. It had the certainty of a man who had revised every position he owned and arrived finally, hot, at one he would hold to the end. When they drew apart, she left her hand where it was. "There is one more matter," she said. "Name it. You said 3 things to me in February I have not forgiven. About the road bill, about the rotation of the South Field, and a remark concerning my father's accounts that was technically accurate and entirely unnecessary. I intend to revisit all 3 when the moment suits me. I had hoped you might have forgotten. I never forget a figure," she said. "That did not add up. You will find it is the chief inconvenience of marrying me, I find," he said, "that I have already made peace with the inconvenience." They were married in June, at the small stone church that stood in the valley between the 2 estates, which was geographically convenient and socially correct, and also, as Eleanor had noted the first time she saw it, a genuinely beautiful church, with a fine east window and a floor worn smooth by 500 years of feet. She wore dark green. He was not surprised. Her father merely nodded when she told him, the nod of a man receiving confirmation of a thing he had known since she described a certain listing in a carriage the October before. The Duke of Ashforth, Thomas Hartley had said, looking up from the accounts he reviewed, the way other men breathed. "The one who told you to know your place. He has revised the position considerably, has he? He came to my gate and apologized, without a single excuse in it. Then he refused to save his states by marrying a woman he did not love. Then he proposed to me twice, badly the first time and properly the second, and meant every word of the second." She had paused. "I find I cannot hold a man's October against him when in June is everything it ought to be." Her father had set down the pen. "Is he good enough for you?" She had considered it honestly, because he had never once accepted a dishonest answer from her. "He is trying to be. That is the truest version I can give you. It is the best version there is," he had said, and gone back to his accounts. And that was the whole of his blessing, and it was enough. Lady Castleton insisted on hosting the wedding breakfast, and on inviting Lord Pemberton. And when Eleanor raised an eyebrow, the aunt only smiled the real smile, the one she had for the rare occasions when society genuinely delighted her. "It is better to have him at the table where he must behave," she said, "than outside it where he will not. And I shall not pretend I am above enjoying the sight of Lord Pemberton raising a glass to your health. A woman of my years must take her pleasures where she finds them." Pemberton came. He behaved. He said the right things at the close and met Eleanor's eyes when he said them. And there was nothing left in the look but a tired acknowledgment, one formidable person to another. It was as near to peace as men like Pemberton ever come, and she accepted it as such and gave him no reason to regret the accepting. And in the East Garden, in the long gold light of an evening that did not seem to want to end, after the breakfast had wound down, and the county had performed itself and gone home satisfied with the story it had been following. Since October, Edmund found her among the rose beds, which she had already begun, in her head, to redesign. "The climbers belong on the south wall," she informed him. "Whoever planted them here was a sentimental fool. They are yours," he said, "all of it. The garden, the south field, the line, the ditch, the hall, and the library that wants reorganizing on no system I have ever been able to defend. You did not marry into my place, Eleanor. You arrived with your own, fully built, and made room in it for me." She looked at the roses, standing in the wrong beds. She thought of a word that had been an insult in October, and had turned itself wholly inside out across 8 months. The way a thing will when you apply the right evidence to it long enough. Know your place. He had meant it as a wall. It had become the truest thing he could have said to her because she had always known her place, exactly. And it had never once been the small thing he first imagined. And then she did the thing she had been saving. She stepped back, and she curtsied. It was a perfect curtsy. The fourth, though only she was keeping the count. Not the exiting one from the October library, the one that had said, "I see you, and I am leaving." Not the slight private acknowledgement across the assembly. Not the deliberate refusal of one at her own desk. This curtsy was full and deep, and it took complete control to hold and complete intention to offer, and she gave it the exact measure of seconds it asked for. And then she rose and looked at him directly, and he understood it. She watched him understand the whole of it. "I see you. I am not leaving. I am here, Eleanor," he said, and her name in his voice carried all of October and November, and every cold month between. "And none of it was a wound any longer, Edmund," she said, and she took his hand, and this time he did not let go. "So let us stop the carriage here, in the gold light, with the roses in the wrong beds and the right ones not yet planted. Because there is a thing worth saying before a story like this fades to dark, and it is the whole reason a story like this is worth telling at all. Consider what very nearly happened. A man looked at a woman across a library and decided before she had spent 10 words that he knew the entire measure of her. He saw the new money, the coal, the trade, the father who had built it all from nothing, and he filed her under a single word, and the word was place, and by it he meant something small, and he very nearly missed her. He nearly spent the rest of his life a wall, built out of his own worst year, married to no one, or married to a stranger sent to punish him, slowly losing the land and the laugh and the chance, all because he had measured a whole person with the wrong instrument and trusted the reading. Be honest, now, the way her father was honest. How many times have you done the same? How many times have you weighed a man by the roughness of his hands, or a woman by the newness of her money, or a stranger by the accent, or the coat, or the one fact you happened to learn first, and filed them under a word, and ridden past? We all carry that instrument. We were handed it young. It is fast, and it is confident, and it is wrong more often than any of us would care to count, because it measures the surface of a person and calls the reading the whole. Eleanor was a fortune to be matched, and a problem to be managed, and a climber to be put in her place, right up until she proved the one mind in the county, clear enough to drain a flooded field, settle a 70-year feud, and free a proud man from a debt that would have ruined him. None of that was visible in the library. All of it was already there. And here is the harder truth, the one this story is really built on. Under the boundary lines and the rose beds, a man's pride will lie to him in the gentlest voice it owns. Edmund did not believe himself cruel. He believed himself principled. He took the worst thing he had ever done, the slow wearing away of a frightened girl, and built it into a doctrine, and gave the doctrine a respectable name, and carried it 3 years believing it made him wise. Grief does that. Shame does that. We take the thing we cannot bear to have done, and we turn it into a rule about other people, so that we never have to sit alone with the smaller, truer word for it. The courage in this story is not the curtsy, fine as the curtsy is. The courage is an old, proud man standing at a wooden gate, staring at the post because he could not yet bear the woman's eyes, finally saying the true thing aloud. I corrected her until there was nothing left. That is the bravest sentence in the whole of it. He was not a young man. He had carried the lie for years, and he set it down anyway, so can anyone. So perhaps, can you? If there is a sentence somewhere, you have been dressing up in a kinder word. There is one more distinction the story draws as clean as a surveyor's line, and it is worth carrying home with you. The difference between defending a person and pitying them, between freeing someone and owning them. Eleanor could have held that debt and called it love, and bent the man to her exactly as Pemberton meant to. The whole of her decency lives in one gesture, the handing back of the paper. I hold it so that no one else can. Real respect does not rescue people into dependence. It hands them back their own choice and trusts them to make it. If you love someone, you do not want them grateful. You want them free and standing on their own feet and choosing you anyway. That is the only kind of yes that is ever worth having, so it makes you wonder. How many good people have we sent away with a polite nod, a closed gate, a single word filed under the wrong heading, simply because we never thought to ask who they truly were? How many walls have we raised out of our own worst days and called them principles? And how many of us would have the plain courage late in the game, with our pride at stake, and nothing left to hide behind, to stand at the gate and say the true word at last? I would like to hear from you before you go. Have you ever been measured by the wrong instrument? Written off before you spoke, judged for where your money came from or how you talked or whatever someone decided you were at a glance, and then proved them wrong, quietly, without ever raising your voice, by simply being exactly who you always were until they had no choice but to see it? Or have you stood on the other side of it, the way Edmund did, and lived long enough to revise the verdict and set the old pride down? Tell us, down in the comments, in your own words. We read every one of them, and the truest tend to be the ones that took the longest to write. The roses, after all, do better once they are moved to the wall they were always meant for. And it is rarely too late to put a thing where it belongs.